Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Good, good. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for waving. I saw you up there. It's an honor to sit here with Chitra and talk about the Forest of Enchantments because it is a really beautiful story. It is a timely story, and we're going to get into that. And I think it's something that everyone should read. I have started it, and I'm very excited to pick your brain and understand more about how this story came about. So thank you for being here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rekha, and thank you to everyone in the audience. I know it's early on a Saturday morning. I know there's a lot of construction on the freeway, so thank you for making it. A quick invitation to people in the back. Please feel free to come closer to us. We are quite safe.
All right, let's get started a little bit. So we are talking about the Forest of Enchantments, and this has to do with the epic, the Ramayana, which is a story that has been told and reinterpreted over a long time. But this is unique in that the focus is on Sita, and a very strong female character that I think a lot of people didn't realize we don't know a lot about. But for those who need a refresher, maybe give us an overview of the Ramayana.
So the Ramayana, as many of you know already, is the story of Ram and Sita, but the focus in most of the Ramayans is on the life and adventures of Ram, who is a prince of Ayodhya. His father has made a promise, and to fulfill that promise, Ram, who was newly married to Sita at that point, decides that he will fulfill that promise and go to the forest, be banished to the forest for 14 years, at which point Sita chooses to go along with him. Sita is abducted in the forest by Ravan, who is often interpreted as the demon king, who comes from the island of Lanka. And she has to live there for a year while Ram gathers forces, and finally he rescues her. There are many things that happen, but then they go back to Ayodhya. Everything is very happy, but then because there is a lot of gossip about Sita and her possible chastity while she was in Ravan's island, she is banished. And she's banished kind of without her knowledge. She's just sent to the forest. She is pregnant at this point with her 2 babies, whom she will bring up in the forest. Ram will continue to be a king. He is known as a very wonderful king, and he is indeed. He is a great king. Ram Rajya, or his kingdom, is lauded for, ever since the Ramayana, and held up as a model. Sita brings up her children in the forest. At the end, they will be reunited, the children and Ram. Ram will ask Sita to undergo a test by fire, which she has already done once. And he says, please do it here in the court so everybody can see that you are indeed pure. And Sita says, no, I know I'm pure, you know I'm pure. I do not think that is appropriate. And she refuses, and at that point, she disappears and she goes up to the celestial spheres.
Suffice to say, Sita's had a rough life.
She has, and I feel that she has handled all her problems in an extremely dignified, graceful, and courageous manner. Mm-hmm. Something that hasn't really been focused on in the earlier tellings of the Ramayana, in the retellings. And so I really wanted a book that focused on Sita and her voice and her feelings, because I feel she is a great model for women today all over the world.
And let's talk about that a little bit. In your foreword, you talked about how this story, when you first thought of it several years ago, you thought I'd get it done in a few years, but it took a lot longer because you really wanted to make sure you got this right, and there were challenges in that, correct?
Yes. So once I wrote my earlier novel, The Palace of Illusions, which some of you might know about, where I am doing something similar with our other epic, the Mahabharata. I'm retelling the story of Draupadi, who is the most important and interesting woman, for me at least, in the Mahabharata. So I retold her story, again, from her point of view. And then, obviously, I thought of our other epic, the Ramayana, and I wanted to do the same for Sita. But At least when I was growing up, uh, my elders often would bless me on auspicious occasions, and they would say, "May you be like Sita." But what they really meant is the popular interpretation of Sita as being meek and mild and compliant and never complaining. And I did not like that. I did not want to be that kind of woman. And in fact, I don't think I ever was. I was a bit of a troublemaker. Okay, this should not leave this room. Okay, just for you guys. But anyway, so I was not happy about it. But then, as I started thinking about the character of Sita, I had this inner feeling that there was a lot more to her than came down to us through the ages and the popular retellings and maybe some of the TV shows and so forth. And I really wanted to explore that. And when I went back to the original epics, and that's where I had to do a lot of research, because I said, let me really see what's out there. And when I read Valmiki, and when I read the 15th century Bengali Ramayana, the Kritibasi Ramayana, especially those are my two main sources, when I read the Kamba Ramayana from the south, I saw that is actually not so. Sita is a very strong character, but the focus has never been on her. So I said, well, let's change the lens a little bit. Let's throw the spotlight on Sita and see what might she have been thinking when these things were happening to her. How might we interpret her actions differently? And I can give you one example, which is that often when Ram goes to the forest to Banvas, Sita is seen as meekly following him. Even in all the pictorial depictions, Sita is in the middle, Ram is in the front, Sita is in the middle, Lakshman is in the back, she's being protected, she's just kind of going along. But when I read both Valmiki and Kritibas, I saw that this was not the case. Ram actually tells her, please stay at home, where you will be safe, and please take care of your in-laws, my parents, while I'm gone. And Sita says, no way, I'm not going to do that. She says, I married you, my place is at your side, and besides, I don't want to stay in this forest while you go off adventuring. I also want to go with you and be part of the adventure. So actually they have an argument, and Sita wins that argument, and that's how she goes to the forest.
I like that. What do you think will be the most surprising point about Sita that your readers will find in your book?
I think there are so many that it's hard to focus on just one. But I think one of the things that really struck me is that Sita shows us a very special way to be strong. We often think, and perhaps many women especially think this, having been in positions of subservience, many women feel that if they want to break out of that, they have to become militant, that they really have to become kind of aggressive in order to win their battles. And Sita shows us how it is so possible to be dignified, to be graceful, and to be strong all at the same time. She's never shrill, she's never accusatory, but she expresses what she feels. And she points out what is wrong. But she's always very amazingly mature and wise and dignified, even when she is hurt. And I personally learned a lot from the interpretation, writing this interpretation of Sita, about how I should perhaps conduct myself in the world. And ultimately, I see in the case of Sita, that when one is able to deal with one's challenges in this way, really everyone comes out to be a winner. And one of the things that I was very positively impressed by Sita is, although, yes, she is hurt by what happens to her, and she is hurt sometimes by the decisions that Ram makes, she never puts him down. She tries to understand where he's coming from. She doesn't always agree with it, but she realizes that as a king, Ram has made a decision that he will put his kingly duties ahead of his personal loves and desires. And although she may not agree with it, we may not agree with it, she certainly sees and respects where that is coming from. That is never her problem. She often says to Ram, you should have, or she says to Ram at important moments, you should have explained to me what you were thinking. I would have agreed and we would have made a decision together. I think that's what hurts her, that she is not allowed to make a decision along with Ram about these important things that affect the kingdom and both of their lives. So I think I learned a great deal. Draupadi presents us with one kind of model. She's much more assertive, aggressive. She'll go right at the enemy. And that is, of course, very dramatic, and many people have loved that and told me about that. But Sita provides us with a whole other paradigm. And I think it's important for us as human beings in the world who have to often deal with, challenges, to have both those models.
Absolutely. I think what is so interesting about this story, it's an epic story, it's an old story, and yet that model of how a strong female woman should be has transcended into modern times. And it's very timely. I mean, we're talking about things in media now about the Me Too movement. We're talking about the gender pay gap. These are all issues that women are dealing with now and have been dealing with for quite some time. So Sita being sort of a strong role model really resonates, I think, at this time.
Yes, I'll give you two examples. I mean, there are many examples of how she is very, very timely. I'll give you three. Okay, the first one is kind of a funny one. So she comes from her father's palace in Mithila, where Janak is a very different kind of king. He has decided he will only have one queen, and that is it. So their household is very simple, let's say. She comes into Ayodhya, where Dasharath has decided to go kind of a different route. He has 3 main wives, but he has a number of sub-wives. So it's a very, political climate inside the women's sectors of Ayodhya. But she navigates it very carefully. She knows who of the 3 main queens, she knows exactly how to behave with which one, and where to be strong and where to kind of, allow them to feel that they're getting their say, but she always gets her own.
That's incredibly, she seems very good at politics.
Yes, and we don't think of that when we think of Sita,
don't.
But she is very wise, I would say. She's very wise. She has a lot of emotional intelligence. So that's kind of the funny one, because, and when she comes to Ayodhya, she finds that Kaushalya, Ram's mother, is not the favorite queen. Dasharath really loves Kaikeyi more, or at least she has more hold on him. So she decides she's going to change this. And I'm not going to give away how she changes it, but she comes up with a plan. Okay. And at the end of which, things are much better between Kaushalya and Dasharath. But the two events that you were talking about that I think are serious and timely is, one is when Ravan is killed, Sita is rescued. Sita is delighted. I mean, she hasn't seen Ram. It's a really moving moment in the story of the Ramayana. She hasn't seen Ram for a long time. She's been separated. She's been dreaming about this day. And Ram says to her in front of everybody, in fact, he has her brought in front of the entire army, and he says, I have done my duty by you, by having rescued you, but you will be considered impure. You cannot go back with me to Ayodhya. You go where you want, and you stay with whoever you want to stay with, but I cannot take you back. And she speaks up. She is devastated, obviously. She speaks up, and especially in my book, I've given her more words than the originals. But even in the original Valmiki, she speaks up and she says, I had no control over the violence that was done to me by taking me away. I am pure. And most important, I am pure in my heart, which is the only thing I can control. Mm-hmm. And so she stands up and speaks against victim shaming, which I think women have found over and over. I mean, a lot of the problems with the Me Too movement, women who did not dare to speak up, was that they were afraid of this. They were afraid of victim shaming. And Sita, centuries ago, speaks up and she says, it is not right to shame the victim for something that she had no control over. And then she says, you cannot decide what I'm going to do with my life. I will decide. And then she calls for the fire, which also in common interpretations is not known, that Sita is the one who says, light a fire, I will step into it, I live my life on my own terms. People think that maybe Ram asked her to go through this test. And of course, when Sita steps into the fire, amazing things will happen. I will not give that away either.
But it sounds like her bravery was not appreciated. While it was noted, it was not necessarily appreciated or spotlighted.
It was not spotlighted on. I think, because the spotlight traditionally has been on Ram. And the final one that I want to say is she's sent to the forest, she's pregnant, she knows she cannot go back. She could weep and wail, and being human, she will. She will go through some sorrow and some anger. But then she says, you know what? This is my situation. I'm going to make the best of it. And she is literature's first single parent, the first single mother woman bringing up her children. And she says to herself, I'm going to bring these kids up really well. Not only will they be brought up as well as princes in a palace, but I'll teach them, and this is my Sita, I'll teach them how never to behave towards women. Okay.
That's a very good point. When you and I were talking earlier, you said that this also was a reflection, this story was a reflection of immigrant culture and stories. How so?
So I feel that apart from the fact that we all from our culture love the Ramayana, it is a great story. And I think it is not known as well in America as it should. In America, people know about the Western epics a lot more. They know about the Ramayana, but not in depth. They know the name, but they don't know the story. And I feel that it's very important, not only just, in terms of world culture, that people should know about each other's cultures, but right now in America, I think it is very important for Americans to know what a wealth of culture the immigrant communities bring to America with them. And by sharing our stories, I think we can learn to appreciate each other. We can learn to appreciate each other's cultures. We can learn to, just learn from each other's stories. There's so much in the story of Sita for everyone in America to learn, not just Indians. I think especially at this point when there's so much negative, I would say, propaganda about immigrants, it's really important to see what immigrants are bringing to America, what are they adding to American culture, how stories like the story of Sita live in our culture, right? And I think that's just very important. Apart from the fact that Sita's story is, as you said, very timely to women in America, I think it's very timely in people's appraisal of immigrants.
Is there a passage or a chapter in the book that you would like to share? I know you don't want to give away the whole thing, but there was one thing that you had mentioned that was really almost a turning point for Sita.
Okay, and that is, let me just find it. So this is from that moment where she has come to the forest. She thinks she's been sent to the forest for a little R&R, for a little holiday to Valmiki's ashram. And, she's all excited because she has always loved forests. That's why this book is called The Forest of Enchantments. Forests have been important in her life. The first forest where she goes with Ram for 13 of the 14 years is where they really fall in love. She has the most happiest memories of a much simpler existence. So she wants to go back. She says, before I become a mom and things get really busy, let me go to the forest. Ram is like, yes, absolutely. And he sends her with Lakshman, and she's all excited, and Lakshman is weeping. And she's never seen Lakshman weep. She says, why are you weeping? And then he tells her, you've been sent to the forest, but you're not going to come back. And he explains to her why people are talking about you. People are gossiping. They're saying they don't know what happened when you were in Ravan's palace. My body trembled, but this time with anger. He banished me because a few people are gossiping. People always talk. Should an elephant turn around and run away because dogs are barking? You know Ram, Lakshman said sadly. He's always believed that the reputation of a king should be above reproach, and even more so the reputation of a queen. It's what he built his whole life around. He can't change his nature, no more than a leopard can change his spots. And then she responds a little later. Rage had receded from me. My teeth were chattering. I felt cold and defeated. But why didn't he tell me any of this, I said. Why didn't he explain what was going on? I would have understood. I would have been angry, yes, but I would have also sympathized with him. Don't I know how important his reputation as king is to him? Together, we might have come up with a better plan. And even if we couldn't have come up with a solution, at least I would have been part of the decision, not a victim of it. I choked up with tears. I tried to swallow them, but they kept coming. But he didn't trust me, Lakshman. My husband, whom I trusted from the very moment my father put my hand in his. My husband, who I believed in through the darkest nights of my despair in Lanka. My husband, whom I forgave even after his harsh words on the battlefield in Lanka gave me no choice but to throw myself into a fire. My husband, to whom the gods themselves proclaimed my innocence. That husband has now discarded me like an old sandal. You go back and tell him this, Lakshman. He sentenced me to banishment because people were whispering that I might have betrayed him. But he's the real betrayer. Who's going to sentence him? I turned and started pushing my way blindly through the bushes, not sure where I was going. Behind me, I could hear Lakshman calling out frantically, urging me to stop, but that only made me hurry. Brambles tore at me. I didn't care. When I'd stepped into the fire in Lanka, I'd believed that nothing could hurt me any worse, body or soul. How wrong I'd been. The pain was so excruciating now that if it hadn't been for the babies, I would have thrown myself into the Yamuna and ended the burning. My babies, the most innocent, the most wronged. I could feel them inside me, trembling, clutching at each other, sensing that something terrible had happened. Don't be afraid, I whispered to them, pushing my way determinedly into the dark, even though I had no idea of what it held. Hot tears scalded my cheeks. I'm going to live for you. I'm going to guard you with my last breath. I'm going to love you enough for mother and father both, so you feel no lack. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to be princes. But more than that, I'll teach you what you need to know to be good human beings, so that you'll never do to a woman what your father has done to me.
That's an incredible moment in the book because she's essentially been betrayed, she is devastated, and yet she retains her dignity. When we were talking...
And she focuses, I think, very intelligently, certainly something that I felt I could learn from her, on what she can do. Mm-hmm. Because there are always choices, right? Even when terrible things happen to us, there are several choices that Sita's life exemplifies. One is we can always control how we react to what has happened. We can't control what happened. We can control our reaction. And then we can look at the situation and examine it and decide what is the best thing I can do in this situation. And let me not worry about all of the rest. Let me not weep and wail and curse about things I can do nothing about. I will do what I can do. That's what I learned from Sita. She does this over and over again. She figures out, in this situation, what can I do? And she does it.
Her problems are sadly relatable, but we've always sort of put her on this pedestal, but she's not a goddess, and we've discussed how she's not quite human, she's an avatar, but really she is so grounded and down to earth, and her experiences are incredibly human, and that helps us relate to her.
I really wanted to do that. My Sita in the Forest of Enchantments, and I thought a lot about it. Really, I prayed a lot as I was writing this book. I said, let the right words come. Let it be, let it be at once correct and accurate, but also real. Let the readers of this book see Sita as a woman as well as everything else, so that they can relate to her, so that they can learn from her. If you see how a god is behaving, you admire, but you don't always feel you can do that. But Sita is very much a woman, a daughter who loves her parents, a woman in love with her husband, a woman who's fighting against all kinds of odds in the world, including what society is saying, and a mother who's finally bringing up her children on her own.
Why do you feel personally that this was an important story to tell?
Well, like I was saying, I feel Sita is a wonderful icon for us, for all of us women of many cultures, certainly in India and among our Indian American South Asian community here, but also in terms of how a woman deals with things. So I think that was very important for me to show a different kind of resistance, to hold up as a model this different and dignified model of resistance, which is it's kind of a non-violent model of resistance. And I felt that that was really important. I learned a lot about. So sometimes after writing this book, I'll feel like saying something at home to my husband, and I'll draw back, and I'll say, you know how they have those little signs in the backs of the cars? What would Jesus do? So now I say to myself, what would Sita do?
Your husband is sitting right there.
Yes,
he appreciates it.
I don't know if he'll agree with me.
Finally, for those who haven't had a chance to read your book, what do you hope they come away with?
Well, first of all, I think, this is my hope, that they will just love the story, because it's a great story. Mm-hmm. And in the Forest of Enchantments, it's a great story, which I hope they will love whether they've ever read the Ramayana or not. Although my hope is that having read this, they will also go back and read the original Ramayana, one of the original versions, and see how I've changed things, or how I've just put the light on different things without changing any of the major events. None of the major events in the Ramayana are changed in this book. Mm-hmm. That was my challenge, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to not change the incidents, but change people's understanding of the character. And I hope I managed to do that. So first of all, I hope they'll just enjoy the story, which is a great, fun story. I hope they will, relate to Sita, who, in the writing of it, I felt she is a wonderful character with so many different, she has a lot of different angles. Mm-hmm. That we may be surprised by. So I hope there will be some surprise and some of that, that identification.
Yeah. It's nice to finally really hear her voice. I think that her voice is, not that it's been unheard, but it hasn't necessarily been acknowledged. So
yes, it hasn't been focused on much.
Absolutely.
So I really wanted a book that focused on her, put her right in the center. That's kind of my overall enterprise, or I should say my project in a lifetime of writing. I've always tried to put women in the centers of their stories and show those stories from their points of view, to see how really the teller changes the understanding of the story, and how, in my belief, more women's voices need to be heard. It is also my hope that as more and more women's voices are heard, more men will read women's stories. Women have traditionally, over the centuries, always read men's stories for many reasons that we won't go into. But there's often a sense that, this is a book about women, so only women should read it. I think that is very harmful for a society, any society, where we separate these things. For one, then we're not spending imaginative time inside a woman's head, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. We're not looking at how she sees things and how she understands things. So that's my hope also, that in addition to many women readers, I hope men will also look at Sita's story. And actually, this book has already come out in India, and I have been pleased by how not only women but men have responded to it and written to me and said, I never thought of it this way. And they've also said Sita's story reminded me of my own mother's story, my own sister's story. And that is ultimately what I hope, that what we read in the pages of a book connects to what we are experiencing in life, and perhaps we look at those experiences with a new empathy.
I love that. Why don't we open it up to some questions?
Okay.
Ready for that? All right, who has the first question?
Yes. I think a mic is coming to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Chitra, I first want to congratulate you on, I'm going to go back a little bit. I loved your Palace of Illusions. I haven't read this yet. I have two questions, if I may. I think your titles are magical and poetical. So the Palace of Illusions and the Forest of Enchantment. So how do you decide on your titles? That's the first question.
Okay. The question is, how do I decide on my titles, such as Palace of Illusions, Forest of Enchantments? You know, titles are very important to me. I think a lot about them, and it's usually only towards the end of the book that I'll understand what the title needs to be. For Draupadi's story in the Mahabharata, the Palace of Illusions was very appropriate because she always wants a home, a palace of her own. She doesn't get it. She gets it very briefly, and then she has to leave that palace. So she's always hankering for a home of her own, and only towards the end will she realize that the real palace is the one inside. And the Palace of Illusions also refers to this world, the world of Maya, the world of illusions, and the palace that we are all living in. Until we realize its nature, we will never be able to step out of that. With the Forest of Enchantments, I knew that from the beginning, forests and the natural world are important for Sita. She is a child of the earth. She's found in the earth. She is happiest when she is in the forests. And in the forests also, when she is not happy, as when she is imprisoned by Ravan in Ashokvan, the Ashoka forest, right? That is where she finds the strength within herself. And in the final forest, Valmiki's forest, she will at once find that strength to go on with her life, to be a really good and strong mother, but she will also learn to love that forest and that ashram area very much. So there are moments of important growth and change for her. And they're all enchanting in different ways.
I love that question. Next
question
Uh-huh.
Were you aware of the limits of reinterpretation? Because you're dealing with a story that is very, very beloved in the country.
Yes.
And you're retelling the story 2,000, 3,000 years later. And I'm sure as you were trying to draft this new character, you're almost reimaging her, were you aware of how far you could go without it becoming, say, an issue with popular or where it becomes offensive, and where you can be creative enough to do something new? So how did you navigate those two spaces?
Right. So this question is about the dangers of reinterpretation, and was I concerned as I was writing Sita? I was concerned even when I was writing The Palace of Illusions. But I hope that in both books I have started from a position of respect, where I respect the old texts, and therefore I have not changed the major events. I have kept all of them. They're from either one version of the Ramayana or the other. The other thing I realized when I was researching is that there are already many very different versions of the Ramayana. We think the Ramayana is one story. There are literally, I've looked at about 15 different versions which are very different. There's the Adbhuta Ramayana, which says Sita is Ravan's daughter. Okay? And that's an interpretation that's different from Valmiki, so I felt that I was in good company. Now, But was I scared? I was terrified. I was terrified. I was going to go to India. I went to India when the book came out there in January because the publisher wanted the worldwide launch to be in India, and I felt that was appropriate. I was terrified. I was like, I called my publisher. I said, do you think everyone will hate me? And they were like, too late now. Let's go. But I was so blessed because it was just an overwhelmingly positive response. And I think it was God's blessing that it was. But I think people realize that I do come from a place of respect. I want to showcase Sita. It's not like I want to bring down anybody else. I feel that in order to show someone's greatness, we don't have to belittle someone else. I really believe that as kind of a life wisdom. So, no, I was afraid, but everything turned out well. So far, so good. We'll see what you guys think.
Thank you very much. Next question. I see your hand up there. Go ahead.
Another comparison to a Palace of Illusions. Draupadi has never been a heroine or somebody who was loved in the tale or in the epic, but Sita always has. And so as you wrote this book, did you try to make Sita a loved character, and was that a challenge, or how did you navigate that?
Yeah, great question. The Draupadi has always been portrayed as a complex person. And in fact, with Draupadi, Panchali as I call her in the Palace of Illusions, the project was a little different. Here's this woman, everybody says bad things about her. Hey, let's really look at her story from her point of view, and let's see what an amazing person she was. With Sita, the project is, hey, everybody, or at least society says Sita is to be revered. A lot of women feel, well, yeah, she's to be revered, but I can't relate to her. Let me try to portray her in a way that she's at once relatable and admirable. And so that was a different project. So, yes, it was a difficult project because it is harder, in fact, to take a character who is good and make them interesting and human and exciting. When a character is bad, they're naturally, for us, because we are all flawed human beings. Okay, I'll just speak for myself because it's much more fun to read about a character who is causing trouble all the time. Sita doesn't cause trouble. So my challenge was, but she is very interesting. She is very amazing and wonderful, and she's a character with a lot of complexity. Let me try and bring that out, and I hope I've managed to do that.
One more question, Chitra, if I may. You talked about how this story is so relevant today because there's a reawakening in the identity of women. And another analogy is that so many Asian women or Indian women, just like Sita, left their familiar environments and homes and followed their husbands or whatever else to another world. Is there an analogy there that we can learn from and draw from?
Yes, definitely. And for that, we look at the early part of Sita's life when she goes to the forest. And hey, she thought it would be a lot of fun, but when she had to lie down on top of all those stones, it wasn't as much fun as she thought. So I think there's a definite connection right there.
We have one more question down here. I'm sorry, go ahead.
First, congratulations on, I've read Palace of Illusions. We even met you at the book club, at the Novel Bunch book club, Chitra. So that was great, and I look forward to reading Forest of Enchantment. My question is slightly different. You have, talking about both these books, you have a ready plot and a character that you have provided your interpretation. Have you written, or are you considering conjuring a character, a woman character, without a set plot which goes back 3,000 years or more? And I think you get what I mean.
Yes, with the Palace of Illusions and Forest of Enchantments, there was already a wonderful plot, and I have to confess, I loved that. I didn't have to think so much about the plot. I did have to decide which parts to pick out, because the original plots are huge. And, this is both of these are much more focused stories. So that was a new, one kind of wonderful. But really, everything else I've written, which is mostly contemporary and deals with the conditions, the immigrant story, people coming to America, or stories set in modern day India, those are all my own plots. But, final confession, are those stories better than this one, the plot lines? I can't say they are, because the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are amazing plot lines, and I was delighted to have them to work with. But it's a different kind of pleasure, coming up with your own plot.
Chitraji, I had a question for you. I'm here.
Wave to me,
Yes,
sir.
I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you so much for writing these interpretations or stories in English, because kids growing up here are sadly not exposed to the Indian languages and the literature, that beautiful literature that has come from there. My question was, which is your next story? Who is your female character? Because you give the, kind of a baseline.
Okay.
A woman or a lady can approach.
Well, thank you for all the kind words. I have to say, I am delighted that I write in a language that gives me a wider audience. However, again, full confession, I didn't really have a choice, because I grew up studying. All my academics was in an English medium school, so this was really the only language I had to write in. And sometimes I felt bad, because I read my native Bengali fluently, and I always used to write letters to my mother. And once I asked her, I said, do you feel bad that I only write in English, that I don't write in Bengali? And my mother wrote back in her very original way. She said, thank God you don't write in Bengali. She said, your Bengali is at the 6th grade level. You should never write anything.
It's a very Indian mother response. It's very typical. Just honest.
And my next novel is going to be a historical novel set during the British occupation of India. It is about a woman who resists, and whose story, like that of many women who did important things during that time, their stories are buried under other stories. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. And that's kind of in the middle, because there is a story, kind of, but I still have to fill in the moments that history has forgotten, as it were. But I have an overall kind of view.
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap up our Q&A. Chitra, thank you. The Forest of Enchantments is truly enchanting, so very happy to hear about it.
Thank you, Rekha. She was a wonderful moderator. Let's give her a hand. And thank you all for coming out so early Saturday morning. I really, really appreciate it.